What? He he's in his mid-40s, and he was getting divorced, and he moved in with another friend of his, also in his mid-40s, who was never married and heterosexual, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the fact is that this guy really wants to be married, and he wants to have a relationship, and he's always thought of himself as eventually being a husband and a father. But he can't seem to sustain a relationship with a woman. Now, you start to think, all right, the guy's unattractive, he's really overweight, or he's an alcoholic, or he's violent, or he's unemployed, or anything. He's none of those things. He's got a decent job. He owns his own house. He's attractiveness-wise, he's not the kind of guy that women would look at and think, oh, I'd really like to split a grapefruit with him. But he's, kind of, certainly nothing. I thought it was pretty good. He's certainly acceptable if marriage is a market from that point of view. So why can't he get a woman to be interested in him? Well, you don't even have to talk to the guy to find out. Just go into his house. Well, he's got a pool table in the living room. He's got nothing but Bud Light in the refrigerator, nothing but sports posters on the wall, extensive pornography collection, and the women don't seem very interested in the guy, right? And my friend says to him, well, what kind of a woman do you think you'd like to have for a wife eventually? And he said, well, intelligent, yet submissive. Good luck with that. No? So here's a guy who's not me. He's always thought of himself as eventually being a husband and a father, and he's not meeting his life goals because he is caving to this pressure to be a guy. And no, he doesn't know what the program is, and so he can do nothing but conform to it. So our job is, certainly as therapists and as educators, is to name it, is to help men understand what the pressure is, and then we put them into a better position. I'll give you an analogy. This one I've been using a lot, the default options. Sandra Bem, who's one of my intellectual heroes, talks about gender being a set of default options that are pre-programmed into the individual by the culture. And I started thinking about that concept with my very limited knowledge of computers, and I think it's instructive as an analogy. So, you boot up Windows, whatever, and those icons come on the screen, and the size of those icons is a default, which means they're left in place by doing nothing. Well, you can change the size of those icons, right? Now, Aaron, who's very tech savvy, is going, duh. And Fred's going, you can? So here's what it takes to change the icons. First of all, you have to know that it is a default and it's possible for them to change. You would never change them otherwise. Second is, you have to be motivated to change them. Maybe they can change, but they're fine the way they are, but maybe you don't see very well and you need them to be bigger. Maybe you're such an incredible geek, you need to fit so many of them on the screen, you need them to be smaller. Maybe you want your desktop to look differently from everybody else. It's a fashion choice. Third thing is, of course, you have to have the ability to change the skill to change the default options. So I think that when we do education, when we do masculinity education with boys and men, we fulfill that first criterion. We expose the default options. And a lot of exposing the default options, I'm going to show you, we can do it artistically. We can do it through humor. We can do it through storytelling. And it can be powerful and get to their psyches in a different way than just, sometimes showing is a lot better than telling, right? And so, and I think really, I was talking with, is it Rick, the poet? About how we need so much more kind of gender-aware art for men. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what I created toward the end here. So humor is the highest and most mature of all defenses. That's those old Valence studies. It is thoughtful spontaneity, which I know sounds like an oxymoron, like Vacation Bible School, but it's you use humor in the therapy room when the benefits outweigh the risks, and we know there's always risks with humor. And so if you can facilitate an insight with a client, join the client in some sort of way with your humor, you can be a risk, because if you're being funny in the therapy room, the client could think that you're being flip. The client could think that you're laughing at him instead of with him, and it's not joining. And of course, a lot of the humor that's out in the culture is mean. I mean, and the reason why is we live in a mass-produced entertainment culture, and the mean stuff is the easiest stuff to write. I have watched Jay Leno go from a really thoughtful, funny, philosophical comedian to being somebody who spent 2 years doing jokes about O.J. Simpson, to 2 years doing joke after joke after joke about a double murder. Because it's the easiest stuff to write. So there's a lot of mean humor out there, and Howard Stern does 4 hours a day of it. And so, of course, there's no place for that in the therapy room. That we have to. It's like self-disclosure we were talking about in Fred's session. Is that you have to use self-disclosure first. You don't do it unless you have a specific purpose for doing it. And there are some good purposes for doing it. So here's an example. This very good friend of mine, who's a therapist, and she has a client who's very kind of stereotypically masculine, not very close to his feelings, difficult to open up kind of guy, also narcissistic. And one of my rules, I don't know if this, I recommend this very highly, especially with men, but with all clients. One of my rules is you may not, in the therapy situation, talk about yourself in the second person. People say, well, when somebody breaks up with you, then you get no, you have to say, somebody broke up with me and I felt sad, right? And I especially worry about clients who will talk about themselves in the third person, which is like, as in, I got to do what's right for Dion, So this guy is kind of very tightly wrapped and narcissistic and emotionally constipated. He's in the session, and at some point he says, well, there is a feeling, and my friend went, where? She starts looking out the window and saying, wait, I don't see it. Where is it? Well, you don't do that in the first session, right, with a client. But she had enough of a relationship with him that she realized that she could kind of poke fun at this kind of very constricted style. And that he could tolerate that. So I always think in therapy of tact, timing, and dosage. What's your strategy? Going after the person. When are you going to deliver whatever intervention you're going to deliver, including a joke? And how hard are you going to hit him with it? She hit him with it pretty damn hard. I mean, that was pretty hard, but she had the clinical judgment and to know that I have enough of a relationship with this person that I can actually move him, and she trusted herself. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that my background, I started doing stand-up comedy as a hobby when I was in graduate school, and then it actually became my part-time job as I went through graduate school. And then when I tell people that I do stand-up, they go, the most common reaction is, oh, I could never do that. Well, why not? Well, what if I bombed? Hey, you know what? We've all bombed. And the worst thing that can happen after a while is that you bomb and get paid. So the whole thing is like, if you're doing funny and you put your self-esteem in the hands of your audience, you're going to be more anxious, you're going to be less spontaneous, and you're going to be less funny, unless you can really play that anxious role really funnily. Is funnily a word? It is now, right? Strategery, that's what I'm talking about here. The other thing that humor is useful for therapists to help us manage our feelings outside of the therapy room, that we are, sometimes clients can say things that might be hurtful to us or frustrating to us. And, when I have lunch with my colleagues, college professors, they sit there and the first 15 minutes is always complaining about the students or making jokes about this one student. My partner's a history professor, and one of her colleagues got a paper that was clearly like ultra plagiarized. This is a D student who's used the phrase "jaded ennui" in his paper, and just it was funny, but it was she disrespected him by turning in a plagiarized paper. So and this was just a couple of weeks ago. I was in a case conference with some therapists, and this woman said she had this client who is actually also very self-absorbed. And she's a creative person. She does a lot of writing, and she brought in a short piece of writing and asked the therapist to read it. And the therapist read it, and she said, "Wow, I think this is really quite creative." And the client said, "I didn't think it was so good." She said, "I've written things that are a lot better." And in supervision, the therapist said, "So that's what she said. Die, therapist, die!" Like that, it's like it was a very aggressive kind of move toward her, and I would have been hurt if somebody had brought something. I mean, she set her up for that, And so that's a way humor is one way that we get to manage our feelings.